selfishly, it's kind of always a panel that I've always secretly wanted to do in the back of my head, but fortunately, Scott Hecht was the chairman this year, and he kind of gave the boost and was like, we should do this. Literally what I've always wanted to just do, like a war stories panel. Tell me your, I mean, like Emery was talking about earlier, cameras bursting into flames and things like that. Obviously, stories where no one gets hurt or anything like that. But we're going to kind of go through this, this prestigious panel we have here from various levels. We got a couple of people. We've got a couple people from networks, a couple people from some mid-major schools, a gentleman from a major Power 5 school, all kinds of different experiences of where things have either unexpectedly occurred during a live or a feature shoot. We got kind of a variety of different experiences of what people have been through. I'm going to throw this out there, and I don't know if any of you are going to give me anything back, but as we're going through these, if you think of some wild things that you've had to deal with in your times, which I'm sure we've all had them, please don't be afraid to share them. I want to be able to come to you if you've got something funny or something unique, or if you came up with a really creative way to solve a problem that's either a one-time shot deal that you needed to figure out, or it was a problem at a venue that you needed to solve that was going to continue throughout an entire season. We're open. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid. But we're going to start with our 5 prestigious panels on the panelists here. We'll kind of go down the line. Take your time. Go through a couple of your examples. A couple of you have visuals. We'll start at the end with Sarah Backerman, who comes from Pac-12 Networks, has worked in this industry in the college side for a bit. You have the Big Ten Network in your background as well. So Sarah works on many remote operations and live event productions per year. So I'm sure you've seen the gamut of the good, the bad, and the ugly. But give us a couple of examples to kind of get the ball rolling on some things that maybe you've had to creatively solve during a live event production at Pac-12 Networks.
Definitely. So as Brandon mentioned, we do 850 live events at the Pac-12 Networks. That doesn't include all of the shoulder programming, or this year we decided to take our pregame show on the road. So I have a couple slides if I can start with the first one. So this year, we took our pregame show on the road for the men's basketball tournament. We created an entire environment outside with a fan engagement. We're really excited to display this, have everybody in one place. We got there. The winds were extremely high. They ended up having to move the studio set inside. So that first picture that you had seen is actually what it looked like for the start of the game. So 90 minutes to air is when they finally made the decision that it was unsafe to be outside. Our coordinating producer, Bob Schmelsley, was actually outside in his pajamas at like 4 in the morning, picking things up, putting them back in cases, and trying to figure out how to get us back to level playing field. So all morning, all evening, while he's working outside, still no decision has been made. So 90 minutes prior to air is when we start having to make repatches, put everything back together, and then the second picture shows how we got back at the end of the day to finally get out. But you run into this situation where there's so much that's set up and so much that you have to repatch, they couldn't figure out how to go back in. So you don't have a long enough break when you're at a tournament and you're back-to-back games. That 30 minutes isn't enough to completely repatch everything. 90 was pushing it.
Okay.
So this was a really fun one that, it really, as a team, we had to work together and figure out how to make it work. It collided the remote and studio side together even more than normal.
This is an ignorant question, but who makes that call? Is it someone on your staff? Is there like an OSHA representative in the building who's like, gotta go, guys, you gotta get out of here?
Yeah, it was a mixed bag between our EVP, the producers, and then the operations folks.
Okay, cool.
Yep. So if you want to scroll a little bit more, some of these are not as detailed, but this one was some really bad conduit. We show up at the venue, and this conduit, there's about 6 different stations that you have to run the cables through. This is the length of an entire soccer field. What we find out when we get there, this is the first time at the event, there's water in this conduit. So we're already having issues, and then we find out that the way that they built the conduit is not big enough to even fit triacs through it to get everything that we need. So some of it had to be ran along the back of the field, along the fence. We couldn't even get a 4-camera show through conduit. So that was a really tough one. We had literally 4 different people in 4 different holes in the ground, and we had 1 suffer heat stroke. So it was a really rough day, and we just kind of had to keep plugging through. I was out there in a hole. We had our remote tech manager in a hole. It was an all-hands-on-deck type day.
When they say there's no job too big or too small.
Yeah, I had a meeting later that day. I was in a suit. It was I was in a hole. I showed up to my meeting with dirt on my pants, and it was a good start to the day.
Now, just as kind of a quick follow-up for you, since you guys, you're very aggressive and very pioneering in your use of at-home production, Remy, whatever it may be. These might not be any of those specific examples, but how different and more difficult is it to troubleshoot when such a big chunk of your crew maybe isn't on site? How have you had to think about troubleshooting in a different way when 80-90% of the staff is in San Francisco and you're trying to deal with some issues that are happening in Utah or Washington State or whatever it may be?
I think Glenn, who you guys listened to earlier today, probably deals with this the most in terms of trying to get a hold of people on site. So you can't walk out of the truck and have a face-to-face conversation. Sometimes it takes longer to fax or to test anything because you're actually waiting for the phone call back to go do it, to come back. And I think we've really had to get organized and have a pre-approved plan going into the game versus getting out there and being able to kind of spitball and make on-the-fly decisions.
Cool. Interesting stuff. All right. Thanks, Sarah. We'll move on to Bill. Bill, you come from a different perspective. You're more of a features, producer, storyteller. You're behind a lot of BTN, the Journey series, which I know a lot of people in the room are fans of, myself included. So let's talk a little bit more about you and your crew being deployed on site to shoot games in a different way, and you're operating on a very quick, tight turnaround. Anyone who's followed how Hard Knocks turns things around, you're basically shooting, and in a matter of a week, you have a live, you got an episode up on television. What are maybe some challenges in a post-production world where you've had to deal with things on site, where you're maybe trying to follow a certain subject and obstacles just unexpectedly get in the way? What kind of things have you had to deal with?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we just had a great example, one of those just this past March at the Big Ten tournament, which this year was held in our backyard at the United Center in Chicago. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the Journey series, the final episode of the basketball show is basically a 1-hour documentary about the Big Ten tournament. The Big Ten tournament starts on a Wednesday, and our show airs on a Tuesday. So it's a long week. We have a lot of cameras there, which is great, but it's a dual-edged sword. It's a lot of footage for our editors to wade through, and we have to make content decisions of what's making the show and not in the show in a moment's notice. You don't get to wait till Sunday and say, okay, here's what we're going to start editing. You have to edit as you go, and you want to manage the workload on your editors so that they don't burn out. Although they probably would say that they do every year anyway, but we still love them. So this year, there were obviously a lot of great storylines heading into the tournament. Michigan trying to three-peat for the first time ever in Big Ten tournament history. Obviously, Michigan State and Purdue both had terrific runs in the national tournament, were big stories heading in. And so what we do is we'll film a couple pieces ahead of time to kind of have them to set up the games. But I always feel you have to be there from first tip to just in case. You never know. And this year was a great example of that. Wednesday night is I think it was the 11-14 or 12-13 game that involved Nebraska. They weren't going anywhere. Their coach eventually did get fired, but was hanging on for dear life at that time. And they win their first game. We didn't shoot much of the game, but I always want to be there for the end because you never know what's going to happen. It just so happened that night that Tim Miles, the Nebraska coach, runs off the court. And over 1 million of you saw it. He fell and stood up and went safe. And it was a great moment, and it went viral. Unfortunately, there was an unskilled producer who was in front of that shot that was on camera. My text messages were blowing up that night, which was not what I needed. But I didn't think it needed to make the show yet. But then they won their next game. And now all of a sudden, he runs off the court, and he jumps again, and he sticks the landing and puts his arms up in the air. And we knew that. We captured both moments. And so at the beginning of the week, if you had said, what are the odds that you put in a second of Nebraska footage in your 52-minute show, I would have said slim to none. And then here we are on Thursday. We haven't even gotten to the top 4 seeds playing a game yet, and I got to put 4 or 5 minutes in because he's dancing in the locker room. They're throwing water all over each other. Yeah. And it's a great moment. And it just goes to show you that in some of these pieces that we had spent money on and time, and I'd sent my producers out ahead of time to do. We just had to, put them on digital and move on. They didn't make the final cut of the show. So it's a great example for, I think, storytellers of just, you got to embrace what's happening. You anticipate, you kind of hope and think where things go. I mean, we guessed the final. We thought it was going to be Michigan State and Michigan, and it was. But there are other things that happened that we needed to address.
Yeah, and you've talked at this conference a couple of times, and we've talked about it many times, obviously the importance in your job of needing to build relationships, doing a lot of research, talking to SIDs and saying, hey, who's got an interesting story, who's doing that? And you can do all of that work, and still someone can come off the bench out of nowhere and drop 10 in the end of a game. How many times has something like that happened to you? And do you just try to build as many relationships as possible to just cover your butt as much as possible? What do you do?
Well, in our business, it being a conference-owned network, you have relationships with the 14 schools that are the single most important relationships that you have.
Yep.
They're kind of relationships you can't get out of, right? So you better take care of them and make them productive relationships. I think in general, we like to try to, in a perfect world, right? Viewers like happy endings, right? That's what you want the storybook ending. The guy hits the winning shot and he runs into his parents' arms who, been through all this adversity, and, you can imagine the stories that we like. But I always feel, and it's just happened in our shows, like, if it doesn't happen that way and the team loses or they get crushed by 30 points, there's dignity in defeat. And I think that's really important. It's something I tell our staff all the time is it's okay if they lose. Like, that doesn't mean we can't air it. And it doesn't mean that it devalues the story. And don't stop following the story just because they're not dancing around in the locker room or storming the court. And wait for them to come out and see some of those shots. And some of the most compelling images I think our show has captured have been more in defeat than in celebration. Sure. And I think that's an important thing for young storytellers to just remember, is that there is dignity in defeat, and stay with your story, win or lose.
Cool. All right, thanks, Bill. I'm sure we'll come back to you for a couple more in a little bit. I want to move on to Jonathan from Murray State. You had a very interesting year with a very talented basketball player on your men's basketball team this year. But aside from that, at a mid-major school, and I always use the term lovingly, it's not meant to belittle anything, give us a little bit of the perspective on the size of your staff. How limited are you with your resources, and how much harder or more creative do you have to get to make your high-end productions look high-end and be high-end on a night-in, night-out basis?
I think it starts with our students. I'm the only full-time staff member that does video. I'm in charge of all of our live events and all of our post-production work. My time cards are kind of a war story sometimes. At least I get paid overtime. So the crossover season between football and basketball is something special. And then when they decide to give you 3 games in one day, and at first we were supposed to broadcast all of them, it gets to you look at it and you get kind of sticker shock, but then you take little things at a time and work with your students. And I was fortunate enough to have a GA both semesters where we had them for 20 hours a week, and they did a lot of the kind of assistant producers things and a lot of the in the weeds work that you would still show them and they'd shadow you on how to do it, but you would talk and work together different problems. And I think there's always, for me, it started with my students telling me that we got to make our men's basketball broadcast better, because I have friends who just want to see John Moran play. And so we thought, okay, well, we don't have talkback, we don't have IFB, we don't have this kind of thing with our talent. We're simulcasting our radio. How do we do an open? Well, we can shoot it the day before and edit it and make it just as you'd see it on ESPN and just roll it through the program. How do we make our 4 cameras look like 6? Well, we just need talented camera operators. We were lucky to have a couple of freelancers, but then it was students who said, hey, I was watching this. This is how I'm going to run a high camera, because I was watching all these different games. And so you learn different tips and tricks from everybody else. It's kind of like a case, copy and steal everything is the slogan I've heard. And you just find different ways to work with what you got. Because you can't really, once the season starts, especially once the fiscal year starts, your budget that you thought you had is now spent. So you have to continue working and work with what you have.
Sure. It doesn't necessarily have to be basketball, but anything in particular that was notably challenging that you had to overcome this year, whether it was a venue-specific, weather-specific, anything like that?
Definitely venue-specific with basketball. We don't have an elevator to our control room upstairs, and so when something went wrong with our radio guys didn't patch through to give us their audio, I couldn't get up and run down the staircase to tell them, hey, like, press this output button. And the other thing, too, was it's a year-long battle I've had with the wasps that have tried to take over either all of my patch panels or my trailer. They're finding a way, but I've consistently gone at them with the wasp spray, just fighting through.
Fighting that battle.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, moving on to Jeff from Stetson University. Jeff, we were talking before, and you have a relatively recent experience. So why don't you give us a little bit of a lowdown on some of the recent obstacles you and your student team have had to overcome?
Well, we're a small school, Stetson. I don't know how many of you know about us, but I will say Jacob DeGrom and Corey Kluber. That should give you some idea of what we have going on over there. It's pretty exciting. One of the things that's most exciting about it is the young people that we get to come through the program. We don't have our broadcast program, but we do manage to get some kids in there that have an initial desire to see what we're all about. And then once they're in the door, my goal is to just sell them on this is a long-term solution. I realize I'm not directly answering your question, but I want to point out that one of the things that gets our students in the door are students that are successful, that stay with our program. ESPN just recently flew our expressions operator up to Bristol, a two-year student in our program. He just graduated, and ESPN just flew him to Bristol to interview. This for us is a huge landmark, and it speaks to everything that I'm always preaching about team and us being a team and so forth. This same individual previously been with us for 2 years. We rely on him for graphics. You know, we were in the middle of a tournament. He called up and said, you know, I'm not going to make it today. You know, and we don't have a substitute for this guy. There's nobody can fill in for him. So I'm always preaching to these guys that we're a team, and you know, it's important that everybody come in and be responsible for their area and understand that if you don't want this position, there's some other guy. There really isn't some other guy, but I tell them there's this. I tell them there's another guy, you know. And as a matter of fact, I'm talking to him right now. You know, whatever I got to do to keep these kids interested. And we just finished the ASUN baseball tournament. Now, I don't know what you've heard about this, but this tournament was originally 4 days. It lasted 5 days. They had to move the championship game to the 5th day because each game lasted approximately 4 hours.
Fine.
We did 3 hours each. We did 3 games each day. Okay, so I've been in the trenches. My guy David here, who is with me, David Mazel is my guy. He's been in the trenches. We've been in the trenches in our past. These kids, when we look back at them in the back of the trailer, they haven't been here. And they're
the horror in
and
their
there's
eyes.
there's a look of horror on their faces. Like, wait a minute, I'm signing up to work for 18 hours a day for the rest of my life. This is it. You know, you kind of get that feeling. So it's really important that we sell the guys on being responsible for your area. Understanding that if you don't show up, nobody's going to show up and fill in for you. Be the number on your jersey when you're here. We do stuff like everybody in, hands in at the beginning of the game, you know, and we go 1, 2, 3, SVP, you know, whatever it takes to stay motivated through because there is no option to quit. Mm-hmm. And like I said, 4-hour-long baseball games. And this is after we've hooked up the replay that they've asked us to hook up and see if the replay works. And we're going replay at baseball. This will be a 6-hour game in no time if we go along with that. But we do whatever we can to meet the requirements of ESPN, of the ASUN, and then to keep those students motivated so that we know we've got them there as our team members.
Yeah, you learn a lot about a person. Absolutely. During a rainy day of college baseball. You see what's inside you or what's not inside you. Yeah. But kudos, well done on that. And congratulations on your student heading up there as well. What's his or her name?
It's Alex Ramirez, and he's
cool.
He's a good guy. I think he'll get the job. He's got a great demeanor for it, and more importantly, he's really good at expression. So, but having that door open for us has been, for me, it's been 5 years I've been here at Stetson, and having that door finally swing open where they're saying, what do you got for us talent-wise for our talent pool is super exciting. It's as exciting as taking a player like Jacob DeGrom and then watching him go into the pros and receive that big salary and so forth. You know, it's very rewarding.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being here, Jeff, and sharing your stories. Really appreciate it. Tom, as a broadcast engineer, you have a lot of people who come to you and going, help me with X, Y, or Z, and you've come with some interesting stories of things that you've dealt with, some creative problem solving that you've had. What do you have for us to share?
Sure.
So basically, I came into this as a truck engineer, so it was a little bit of a different thing for me coming in and just dealing with fiber. I didn't have to go work in the rain, power up the truck, do all those things. So, you know, we kind of have our well-oiled machine right now at Syracuse University between our student talent and, you know, in front of the camera. Some of it in the control room, some of the above-the-line positions that, you know, they've been doing really well with. And we have a good freelance crew that works with us out in the field. So, you know, I was asked by my boss, Scott Hecht, that to start looking into, you know, some different ways to enhance our productions a little bit. So I brought some video with me, and if you roll that. So we're doing some wireless POVs and some goals. Field hockey is actually my favorite. I think it just kind of, it's pretty slick and it shows the whole goal. We actually ended up doing some, these are all wireless, and the facilities crew is actually giving me a way next year to hopefully hardwire those. So this is lacrosse. Lacrosse is a little bit different. The one piece of advice I can give for this is do not put this camera in during warm-ups because it becomes target practice. So we did it for both men's and women's in the Carrier Dome. And I think it gave us some pretty interesting looks. Obviously, they're rolling a little fast right there, so we roll them slower. We can do that. Now, this is something we did recently in the end of April. We actually did a live rowing event, ACC Network Extra. Drone was our main camera. We couldn't have done it without the drone. As a matter of fact, it was a rainy day, and it was really close for us not to have that drone, so we were kind of a little bit nervous. But we had the drone, we had an RF camera, IMT Vislink Microlight 2 system on a chase boat behind them, and I was able to take a couple of our cameras, some of our Ikegami cameras that we normally use for our productions, you know, at the university, and, you know, put them in locations down the stretch here. And it was kind of a neat experience for us to do this. I actually, we just switched the cameras and had talent on location, and Scott and everyone else at the control room actually did the graphics and replay and stuff like that. So it was a fairly successful run for us for the you know, the first time out going live. I did a 10 meg stream, 10 meg H.264 over public internet to get the feedback, and I did a 2 meg stream of our multi-view screen off of our A10 Blackmagic switcher that we switched this on. So and we had talent on location. That young man right there on the left just won the Jim Nance Award for the top college broadcaster in the country. And our tennis coverage is something that I was asked to do. We actually have 6 courts that we cover, Marshall POV on each court, and then we use a RF camera, and that's RF camera for the cutaways, and that's our ATEM switcher with the multi-view. I mix the audio there. We just embed the mics on, or embed the microphones through the SDI path. And again, I use a couple of Teradek encoders to get back to the control room, because that facility is not connected within our fiber infrastructure on campus. So we ordered a larger pipe from Spectrum, and we're able to go 2 10 meg paths out of there. Okay. So I sit there and I switch the POVs for the courts for whatever court they want to televise, and then our RF guy, or you know, the guy on camera, runs around and shoots cutaways. And we're able to take a Daktronics XML feed, put it in the expression for all the stats and score and all that. So.
Very cool. If you don't mind me asking, what was your backup plan if you couldn't put the drone up during rowing? Not do it?
So the backup plan was we had an RF camera in the boat. And
okay.
I actually, literally, it reminded me of my days of working dirt racing when, you know, guys in the pits yelling, "Point the RF!" You know, I had a guy, you know, standing there, like pointing the directional antennas towards the boat, so we could get at least the RF camera on the chase boat.
Okay.
And then we actually had a 77 by lens as close to the open water as we could, because the open water was the issue. It was
Sure, yeah,
it was,
yeah.
They started the race in the middle of a lake and then brought it down a canal. So that was the backup plan. We actually were pretty lucky. It was a little misty out, but they flew the drone. So
That's great.
those are some of the things that we, try to do a little bit differently this year.
Cool. Thanks, Tom.
Yep.
All right. Well, I threw it out there. If anyone has any of their own kind of wild stories or unique productions that they've tried, does anyone brave enough to share a story of something that they've gone through? I'm not expecting to get anything from you guys, but someone surprised me. Someone surprised me right now. Scott, that doesn't count, but we're happy to hear from you if you want to give some. You got a mic coming at you from behind.
Baseball tonight at the All-Star game in Anaheim, I think it was 2009.
Okay.
George Steinbrenner dies the morning of. And we get a phone call at the hotel about 4 o'clock in the morning. Steinbrenner's dead. We have to go live. Well, all my Baseball Tonight crew is out there. And for anybody who's ever worked on an all-star game, Fox, on the day of the game, they lock up the stadium so that Fox can rehearse. So I've got no set. I've got nowhere to do live hits for SportsCenter. So we had to think on our feet. It's like, what are we going to do? So I grabbed my director, and I said, just follow me. We grabbed a golf cart, went into the basement of the stadium, and started stealing anything we could find to make a set. Okay. We're grabbing risers, tables, anything we could find. And
nacho carts.
Anything that we could set up. If OSHA had been there, they would have shut us down. It was dangerous and it was bad, but we had to get on the air. And within 2 hours after we got to the stadium, we had a set, and we went live all day long from out in the parking lot. Wow. So again, it's, the rule for anybody in here is, do whatever you have to do. I mean, sometimes it's not perfect, but you got to get something on the air, especially when your bosses are screaming back in Bristol, get us something on the air. And so I put Ravitch and Kruk and whoever else was there. We sat them up. We put director chairs up on top of like tables, and we supported it as well as we could. And it's like, don't move. And we went live for like 8 hours that day out in the parking lot. So,
wow. Yeah, not getting it done is never really an option, certainly on a day like that. Anybody else? Yeah, Slammer's got one. All right. Yeah, we're actually right back where you came from, up here.
So as our ACC brethren, I'm sure, are sad about, we imploded University Hall last week. So we were going to live stream it on Facebook Live, this big implosion thing, ceremony, the whole 9 yards, and then Fire Marshal the week before decides that our arena, John Paul Jones Arena, where our control room is in the exclusion zone. So we can't get into the control rooms because they're not letting anybody in. The stream's already been publicized, so we got to figure out, all right, how are we going to do this? So we ended up cutting the show remotely on Ross Dashboard from our soccer stadium, set all the cameras the day before, including a camera on the roof of JPJ, ran all the fiber back through the control room, switched it on a carbonite, shaded the cameras on Ross Dashboard, brought it back up to the press box at the soccer stadium, mixed the audio there, sent it back down to the control room, and then back up again on embedded SDI to a laptop where we were doing the actual Wirecast stream. Wow. And then also set up, because we also weren't 100% sure we weren't going to lose power at JPJ. So our emergency backup was another cable that we ran from one of the cameras into a second encoder connected to the same computer, so we had a second hardwired angle just in case we lost everything. Wow. Power didn't end up going off, but yeah, so that was an interesting couple days. But the building did implode, in case anyone was concerned.
You got decent viewership for that, I hope? People love watching a building explode.
Couple thousand, so it was good.
Cool. Anybody else? No? I'm not missing anybody, am I? All right, cool. Well, thank you very much to the two of you for sharing those. Those are very, very cool. We've got a little bit of time, and I want to kind of go down the line with each one of you. Obviously, we're talking about the unexpected here in many circumstances, and to ask you, how do you prepare for the unexpected is probably a bit of a silly question for me to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are there any kinds of things that you as a team or you with your students or whatever it may be, something that you instill or a redundancy or some kind of piece of advice that you can give someone who, hey, here's something that you can do that can kind of help cover your butt depending on the circumstance, whether it be, a flood or a weather or something like that, or you've got a venue that is a little bit up there in age. Sarah, we'll start with you. Any kind of bit of advice for someone in the audience who maybe can avoid save themselves from running into a situation like this someday?
Yeah, it's tough. I think more than anything, I preach communication. Anybody that's on site needs to know who to call for every single situation that could come up. You have an issue with fiber, who are you calling? You have an issue with audio, who are you calling? You have an issue with cameras. Really understanding the fine tune of that, because when you're talking 5 in the morning on a set day or on the day of the event, 5 in the morning, it's going to be hard to get a hold of people. So you want to be very selective in what you're choosing to do. So we do look ahead, like I talked about the conduit. We knew we were kind of in for a new venue, in for challenges. We brought people in early. We tend to use a little bit more support on events where we predict there might be trouble by bringing in additional runners or production assistants. So that does help a little bit if you need someone to run and go buy something quickly. That does help, but to a certain degree, as you kind of said, some of these are just unpredictable in nature. You do the best you can, and the more you work together and realize you're all trying to accomplish the same goal, I think it helps.
Sure. The show must go on, though, as they always say. Bill, from a post-production or feature shoot standpoint, any kind of different advice for something like that when you're out either at a game or you're at someone's house interviewing a mother, whatever it may be?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a good segue. Like, I think a great skill that's kind of a soft skill for feature producers, storytellers, is just being able to kind of interact, converse, and connect with whomever you're talking to. And you're going to tell a lot of different types of stories in your life, and you're going to meet a lot of different kinds of people, and you have to treat them all kindly. You have to be appreciative of their time. And those relationships work. I mean, I was in a situation many years ago at my previous place of employment where we were doing a feature story on a runner who had basically run out of his life and left his wife and son and basically vanished. And we found him in Hawaii, and we interviewed him there, and then we went to interview the wife whom he had left in Tacoma. And we're in her living room 30 minutes into what's probably going to be an hour-and-a-half interview, and her son comes home, and he was not supposed to come home. And he was not aware that the mother was doing this interview or even doing the story.
Yikes.
And he was hot when he came in. And I'm sitting there like, okay, this might just be the best thing that ever happened to me, because maybe I can convince him to do an interview too. So after half an hour or so of intense negotiation, we were able to convince him, hey, let us finish this interview with your mother. And then he heard what we did and understood where we were going with the story, and then actually sat down. So we actually benefited from it. But it was just a great example of, like, it's not what you want to have happen, is your interview to be interrupted at any time, but it was. But you have to kind of address the situation and make of it what you can.
Wow, that's wild.
That was a wild day.
Jonathan, how about you? You work with a lot of students. How do you kind of help students keep their head on a swivel and be able to act if they need to?
I think a lot of it is hopefully you don't want it to happen, but things go wrong in front of them. And the main thing I'll say is just don't panic. And it's like don't yell through your headset. Everybody can hear, and don't blow everybody's eardrums out. And I just kind of walk them through the steps of how something works originally, and then if it breaks, we get through the problem together, and then they end up knowing it. We had an issue at softball this year where the power kept surging because the design of the facility, we didn't realize this until about midway through, the scoreboard is plugged into the same outlet behind the scenes as our entire production trailer. So at any point during the
Jeez, I can't
production,
even plug in an iron
just-
in my apartment without blowing the
yeah,
blowing a fuse.
just somebody inside that like a gremlin or something just flipped the light switch, shut everything off. And when one time I had a full student crew and I said, okay, I'm just gonna kind of stand off to the side. I'm gonna shoot some creative footage, and if something goes wrong, they've seen this issue happen before. And I come back and I was like, oh yeah, how the last 2 innings go? And they're like, oh yeah, we lost power, but it's all good now. We talked to ESPN, they're fine with it. Like we're back on the air. Like you didn't need to call me at any point. You're like, nope, we're all good. Like so that's like the moments like that where you know you've prepared enough for all the different scenarios. And I think having certain tools and trying to take all your experiences and when you go into either visiting a venue on campus or somewhere where they want you to broadcast from, that's always big. And then you could never have enough gaffer tape and like Allen wrenches and multi-tools to go at it.
That's cool. It is a proud moment when they don't need you to solve something, I imagine, when you're working with students like that. Jeff, I guess similar question for you. How do you prepare your students to handle the unexpected?
Well, cross-training. I mean, we train guys in all the areas. I want if that guy goes down or if something's happening in that area, I want everybody to be able to pitch in, unless it's our graphics guy who's got to be at his station. And then just teaching them cool, like just be cool under pressure, because, you know, here's the deal. We got 4 cameras, and if one of them is not up for this event, we're going to go live with 3 cameras, and it's going to look like 6. You know, it's kind of what I'm preaching to them. And so, in other words, don't have any fear. The worst thing can happen here is that we don't have internet. And we have internet, so we internet and 3 cameras, we can do a show.
Sure.
So is there a need to panic? I find that these kids, they specifically follow the direction of the leader. If the leader's in a panic, they're in a panic when you look back there at them, and they're not ready to go out and tackle some of these problems that they might need help on. So we just trying to motivate them to understand that there's nothing here that can't be fixed with a little bit of preparation. Having the knowledge of how this works is going to aid you on down the line. So we cross-train them and make sure that everybody knows a little bit about everything. And then we just hold on for dear life, because, you know, the truth of the matter is, I don't know if I mentioned this, we had 5 MLB players drafted last year. We had 2 football players go to the pros this year. Did I mention that? That's a sidebar. But, you know, I digress. But my point is that, it really is important to everybody just to keep a cool head, because this game is going to happen as soon as that hour comes. Like I said, whether it's 3 cameras or 4 or whatever. And then we just push that message as one that everybody needs to take heed to. Be the number on your jersey. Be that guy at that station that when I call you, I know that you're going to come into this game and you're going to help us in one way or another, because you have a cross-parallel skill set, or because you're expressing, but you know audio. Now you're on replay. You're out there in the camera because the guy's literally passed out in the field. You know, earlier in the year, after 4 years of troubleshooting everything and having every imaginable problem, technically, for every production, it seemed like, we reached a point early in the year where David and I looked at each other. I said, David, I think we're there. I think we're going to cruise through the rest of the year. And from that moment I said that, every possible thing that could go wrong went wrong on every production. So it was a real education for me. It was education for David, and more importantly for those students and those people who are in those positions to see that, yeah, we can pick it up. When it falls apart, we can pick it up and get back on. And by the time that game is halfway through, in some cases, we've worked out those technical issues, and we're cooking with grease, as they say. So
cool.
We just keep at it.
Nice. Tom, just a real quick parting shot for anyone in the audience, a piece of advice? Anything left on the table at this point?
Well, I'll echo that. Cooler heads prevail. I mean, absolutely. You can't be panicking. When I'm out on location, I'm the only engineer out there, or the only technical person. So we do surround ourselves with talented people, freelancers and whatever. But to be honest, the first thing that came to my mind when you said, what is it that you need, is my fiber cleaning kit. That's,
very good.
I mean, to be honest, I carry it with me everywhere I go, because freelancers still don't know how to put a little fiber cap back onto a piece of fiber consistently. So that's, I mean, to be honest, that's, I mean, the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis is just making sure the equipment is maintained properly. Training is key, and making sure that everything's put back in the right spot and things like that. But cooler heads prevail, especially in those situations where just, it's hitting the fan. You can't panic. So.
All right. Let's give this panel a round of applause. Thank you very much for bringing us home.